My name is Steve Gilman, and for decades I've been helping brands engage with their audiences. On this podcast, we'll connect the dots in the fast-paced world of branding by talking with entrepreneurs, leaders, and marketers on the front lines of telling brand stories. Today we're talking to Pat Craig, Executive Director of the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Keansburg, Colorado. The sanctuary sits on over 10,500 acres and provides natural habitat for hundreds of rescued lions, tigers, and other exotic animals. On today's episode, Pat shares what inspired him to start the rescue and how being specific about your audience and telling great stories can make a big difference to your organization. Welcome to the Brand Story Podcast. My name is Steve Gilman, and our guest today is Pat Craig, Executive Director of the Wild Animal Sanctuary in Keansburg, Colorado. Here's some really quick background on the Wild Animal Sanctuary for listeners that don't know what this organization is and how great they are. It's the world's largest and oldest carnivore sanctuary and sits on over 10,500 acres of natural habitat. The rescued animals get to explore that, and it's home to lions, tigers, bears, wolves, leopards, just to name a couple. And they really are true pioneers in creating large acre habitats for the big carnivores to live. And Pat has over 40 years of experience in rescuing large carnivores and has been key to creating and building the unique place that is the Wild Animal Sanctuary. He also lectures nationally on wildlife rescue and has worked tirelessly for the protection of these animals. So Pat, hi, welcome.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this today. I think our listeners, this is going to be a little different for us as we're a podcast that concentrates on brand storytelling and leadership, but honestly, your brand, I think, is pretty amazing, and the journey you all have been through is pretty extraordinary.
Well, thank you. It's a little different for sure.
Yeah, it is, and my Vice President, Lindsay, has actually been on your property. She did one of those, she owns one of those sponsorships that sponsors an acre.
Oh, yeah. Very cool.
She's been on your walkway and been there and very passionate, and so...
That's great.
Yeah, so I've also become very... passionate about what you all do, and we're just big supporters. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. It's kind of you.
So let's talk a little bit about how you got started in all this. I know you weren't intending to go into animal rescue at all.
No, not at all. I grew up on a farm outside of the city of Boulder, Colorado, and it was just a small gentleman's farm, nothing big. And so we had horses and cows and chickens and things like that. And so I loved animals, but 41 years ago, there wasn't a lot of careers for people that were going to do anything with animals like there is today. And so, I just thought I'd love to keep doing the farm. And so I was going to just go to college and get a business degree and then continue to own the farm and, keep the animals around, that kind of thing. And so it was something where at one point I got a chance to go visit a friend of mine from high school who had gotten a job as a groundskeeper at a zoo. And so he took me around, and I'm in the back, and which I wasn't even expecting, but he kind of showed me around. And in the back of the zoo, they had all these lions and tigers in small cages, and I was kind of confused. I said, why do we have all these these animals in small cages? And he said, well, they were surplus. And I said, what do you mean surplus? And he said, well, these were babies that were in the nursery that are now too big, and we don't have any room out front. And I said, so they don't even get to take turns going into the exhibit or anything? And he said, no. And I said, they're just going to live in these cages all their life? And he said, well, no, we try to find other homes at other zoos, but most zoos have the same problem, so we end up euthanizing them. And I said, well, wait a minute, that's crazy. I mean, these aren't old, they're not sick, they're not anything, and you're euthanizing them? I said, it just made no sense. And so it kind of caught me off guard, and I was kind of bummed about the whole thing, but obviously this was kind of a surprise thing to me, visiting, and wasn't expecting to do any of this. But so I came back to Colorado and was going to school still, but every day it kept bugging me. And so I thought, well, I grew up here, and Colorado has one of the biggest zoos in the country. So I called the Denver Zoo and said, hey, a friend of mine works at a zoo, and they have all these animals that need help. Can you take some of them? And they said, oh, no, we have 2 tigers out front, and we have 7 in the back right now. And I was like, oh, so this is a big problem. They said, yeah, it's all over. And all the zoos have tons of surplus. And unfortunately, a lot of them euthanize animals. And so I just thought it was kind of crazy, and so it still bugged me for a while. And so then I ended up just calling the federal government and the state government that regulate zoos and said, can't you make it illegal to breed unless something died and you need to replace it? And they said, no, they're licensed, they can do whatever they want. And I said, well, they're euthanizing healthy animals. I said, that seems crazy. I mean, these are majestic creatures, lions, tigers, things like that. And so I said, well, when they're humane society for them. they said, no, there's no humane society. And I said, well, what would it take to make one? And they said, well, you'd have to build a zoo. And I said, well, I'm only 17. I'm not going to
Right.
build a zoo, but I do want to help, and I do have a farm, and I do have land, so maybe I can maybe help some. And so they sent me the regulations, and I looked them over and realized that I'd have to build a lot of specialized cages, and so I did. And then once I got licensed and inspected and all that, I sent a letter to every zoo in the country that just said, hey, I know you have surplus, but if you're going to euthanize something, let me know, because maybe I can help. And I really just thought there'd be, some sort of small response, but nothing big. And in the first month, I ended up getting over 300 responses, and it was
My
just my
God.
mail. Because back then I didn't have, cell phones or fax machine or anything. And
Yeah, right.
so these were just letters coming in every day with lists of animals, everything from elephants to alligators to chimpanzees, but the vast majority were definitely lions and tigers and things like that.
That's
It's
insane.
crazy.
Yeah. So I read that you became the youngest certified person that was certified in doing this kind of animal rescue.
Yeah, I was the youngest licensed zoo owner, if you want to call it that,
Right.
in the country at the time, and that obviously wasn't my purpose. But I did start to respond, and going out and picking up these animals that they were going to euthanize and trying to give them a good home. And of course, that was something that was a big learning curve because I didn't know anything about lions or tigers. But
Yeah, that's quite a learning curve.
yeah, yeah, and so it was very expensive, and it was definitely dangerous in the beginning because obviously you make mistakes and find out the hard way that you shouldn't do this or that. And
Yeah, and the lessons you learn are maybe a little harder than the lessons that most entrepreneurs learn because there isn't a tiger on the other end of most of the mistakes we
yeah,
make.
yeah. No, I ended up in the hospital quite a few times going, well, don't do that anymore, and don't
Wow.
do that.
Yeah, that makes me think like when I was thinking about talking to you, I talk to a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs, and almost everyone starts as an entrepreneur kind of like you did in that they have something that just bothers them. At least the best kind of entrepreneurs are usually trying to solve a problem or, you know, get into something that just needs doing. But
Sure.
your example, I think, is the most amazing, if any, I've come across because you were just, a kid and you're
Yeah,
working on a farm and all of a sudden you're handling tigers and lions.
yeah, yeah. Well, it was one of those things that I didn't think it was really going to happen. I thought I'd make a few phone calls and solve the problem like most people, and that didn't help. And so then I kept thinking about how those animals looked at me when I was at that zoo, and I kept thinking, there's probably dozens of people that have seen this and said, well, somebody ought to do something about this, and then just walked on. And I thought, well, I don't want to be one of those people that doesn't do something about it. So I just kind of kept following the progression, and then when I sent that letter out, I started getting phone calls from all sorts of zookeepers and interns and people that were crying and saying, look, we don't want to euthanize these animals. And so it really was like, I was glad to hear that everybody felt the same way. There just was no solution until that time.
So that really changed the whole path of your life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was 41 years ago,
Yeah.
and worked 7 days a week for 41 years taking care of animals.
Yeah. I bet there's not a whole lot of vacations or,
No, no.
and you're definitely not doing this to get rich. You're doing this to do a good thing.
Yeah, there's definitely no getting rich in this. And,
No.
I have no savings, no retirement, no anything. This is all I've ever done. And in fact, I ended up working jobs for the first 18 years just to
I
help
bet.
support the sanctuary.
Yeah, and for people that don't know the wildlife sanctuary, we'll post links that you can go look. But the you had to deplete your savings and do all this stuff. The animals,
Oh yeah,
their journey to from where they were when you rescue them to where they are now. I mean, it is an absolutely beautiful, expansive, gorgeous place for these animals to roam like they should be. Can you tell me a little bit about the vision of that and how I mean, that is such an audacious vision. You went from your farm to what is today, what, 11,000 acres?
yeah. It's almost 11,000 acres, and um, yeah, it's the main thing was when I first started. Again, I was just trying to stop these, beautiful, healthy animals from being euthanized because it just seemed insane to me at the time. But when I first started, then I realized really quick that the government regulations back then required that all these animals stay in, like a concrete floor and steel bars or steel chain link and then a roof on it, and it was a very stringent type cage situation. And I felt like, well, geez, I might be saving their life, but what quality of life do they have? And I said, is this really even is there really a point to this? Because I'm just, taking them from one cage and putting them in another cage. And so I kept bugging the government, like couldn't we let them into bigger spaces? And they're like, oh no, they have to be in these, confined spaces, and because they're obviously dangerous. And there was a loophole in the regulations that said, like for a circus or a movie animal actor, they could be taken out of their cage and go work on a movie set, or go into a ring and perform. So they could be taken out of their cages. They just couldn't live outside their cages all the time. So I used that loophole to be able to start letting them out. So I fenced the entire farm, and then I started to let, lions and tigers out at a time, and they'd go out for, 2 or 3 hours and run and play, and they'd be tired and come back in. And I started to rotate the animals, and that, to me, I could see them coming to life. They were like, oh, first time a lot of them had ever run in their life before, because they'd always been in small cages. And so then I said, okay, now this makes sense, where if I can find a way to, give these guys the big open spaces that they could live in and just stay in, then there's a point to this. And so I fought with the government constantly for the first, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, trying to circumvent or get them to change the regulation. And they were just like most people. They were terrified that these animals would escape and go run off if they ever got out. And in working with the animals, I realized early on that, it's no different than like, in the backyard, if you go in a subdivision and I said to you, hey, climb that fence and have a picnic in your neighbor's backyard,
Yeah,
you're
right.
like, well, no, because he's going to be really upset. Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of how they felt about their cages, no matter how small or how big they were. That was their territory, and they knew they were safe in their territory. But anytime they went to somebody else's space, or a space they didn't know about, they were scared. And so initially letting them out, I was like, oh, well, look, they're not ready to go just run off to the mountains, or they're, disappear. They actually had to be coaxed out and shown that it was a safe environment to go and play. So it's kind of like taking your dog to a dog park, and if they've never been before, the first time it's pretty overwhelming for most dogs to go and say, oh, well, there's all this space, and who owns it, and am I going to get in trouble playing or not? And so a lot of the early years were spent learning the psychology behind how these animals saw where their confinement or their life was like.
Yeah, I kind of feel like you, in some ways, put yourself through the biggest master's class on animal behavior,
Yeah.
the school of hard
Yeah.
knocks of animal behavior, because I think you
Yeah.
figured out a lot of things that no one else knew.
No, absolutely. And even today, there's still so many people that follow that whole principle of, oh my God, these things ever get out, they're gonna, head to the hills and kill everybody in
Yeah.
the way. And they're actually just terrified to leave their own territory, their own space. So whether that's a small cage or 100 acres, it doesn't matter. So you could actually have a 2-foot fence, and they're not going to just jump over this fence and go take off. If you took a wild tiger from the wild, or a lion from the wild and brought them, well, of course they're going to want to go back to the wild, and that's a whole different story. But I learned early on that captive animals saw the world in a whole reverse setting. Yeah, it was pretty amazing, and that helped tremendously to build these large habitats, and then know what it would take to, in essence, keep them there. Because like when we rescue a new animal, we never just throw them into a big open space like that, because it would be scary. It'd be like taking a child up in the mountains and turning them loose, say, okay, there you go.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah. So, but if you went up and camped all the time and they got to stay up there, and then you spent
Yeah.
weeks, then they'd be like, okay, this seems safe enough. I've seen everything. So anytime we have new animals that we rescue, they go through a rehabilitation process where they get to start in a small cage similar to what they came from, so that it's not overwhelming. And then within weeks or days, they go into a little bit bigger, and then we try to always put the enclosure inside of the habitat they're going to end up living in, and that way they can see that space for many days, weeks, whatever.
Right.
And then one day we just kind of open the door, and some of them will come marching right out, and other ones will stay there and go no, and then come out every once in a while and go back in. And so it's all about them feeling safe, and then they can start to enjoy that space.
That's amazing. That's an amazingly empathic way to go about caring for these like highly traumatized animals.
Yeah, no, it's true. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so good for you guys. I mean, I think that's one of the most amazing things. And you all have an innovation that I think helps people understand how much you all care for these animals. Because in most situations, even when people are trying to do good, it's good to have visitors see the animals because it raises awareness. But you all went further than I think anyone would imagine, to be able to have a way for people to see these animals and learn without impacting them in any way. Can you tell me a little bit about that walkway, which is, I think, in the Guinness Book of World Records now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, early on, we weren't open to the public for the first 20 years of doing this. We just rescued animals and took care of them, but the problem was getting worse, and so more and more people were doing this and trying to have them as pets and breeding and selling, and so the public, general public, didn't know anything about this problem, and so we realized that we really needed to reach a lot of people, and the only way to do that would be open to the public. And I was always opposed to that. Our board of directors and everybody else would always say, hey, open to the public and charge admission, and I was like, no, that's terrible for the animals. They're terrified of people.
Yeah.
So like if you go to the zoo at 6 a.m. before it ever opens, the animals are laying around calmly. But when all the people start to pour in, those are all strangers, and to them, they're all threats to their safety, to their habitat and their territory.
Especially with the experiences they've had.
Yeah, and so no, and when everybody would say let's open, I'd be like, no, first of all, it's a losing proposition. You lose money being open to the public, and you don't make money, because even all the zoos in the country get subsidies and all sorts of things to try and make their budget even. So it wasn't really a financial decision. It was about this education. But at the same time, I still didn't want the animals to have that problem where all these people showed up every day and on the ground level and scaring them. But early on, when I was building enclosures and habitats and things like that, I realized that every time I was up in the air, like on a rooftop or whatever, it didn't matter what kind of noise I made. I could be running power equipment or chainsaws or whatever, and the animals acted like I didn't even exist. So I realized that they didn't think that sky or air was territory and that it was no threat to them. And so eventually, when we got to this point of saying, let's open to the public and educate people, I said, well, the only way we're going to do that is if we have an elevated observation system. So, of course, it was just theory at the time. And,
Sure.
And so we built an initial maybe 100-yard long ramp going up to a big observation deck. And again, we weren't open to the public at the time, but by word of mouth, people would always come out and want to see them. So we were just working, and everybody was a volunteer and feeding and cleaning, but people would come and go up this elevated walkway, and we were just looking to see if the animals cared, and they didn't care. No matter what the people, if they talked to us or made noise, or it was just as if they didn't exist.
Right.
And now the challenge is to build a long walkway that goes over the habitats so that people can actually see these animals and learn about where they came from, because every animal here came from some amazing story. They were in terrible places, and so we started to build more and more of the walkway. But as you say, it eventually ended up being the world's longest elevated walkway and got the Guinness Book of World Records for it. Wasn't anything that we intended,
Yeah, it just kind of developed.
Yeah, we just were building it so that people could access more of the animals to see them, and eventually we realized it was definitely the longest elevated footbridge in the world. So we had the Guinness Book of World Records come out and certify it. And
It's like 30 feet in the air and 1.5 miles long or something.
yeah, it varies
Wow.
anywhere from 16 feet at the lowest to 45 feet at the highest.
Wow.
And it goes over 1.5 miles, like you say. And so people walk down and then they come back. And so it's a 3-mile walk to see the animals. And that's just a portion of what's here.
That's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about the, I know our vice president, Lindsay, has seen the walkway and been on it. And I encourage everyone to go on the web and look at this facility and look at the walkway. I think it's the most humane, considerate, kind way I've ever seen of anyone be like, yeah, you want to see tigers and you want to see lions, but let's not impact them while we're seeing them.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can tell, like, the lions couldn't give a crap that people are up on this walkway.
They're sleeping, hanging out, and so sometimes you're walking right over lions and tigers, and other times they're, quarter mile out in the middle of a big habitat where you have to use binoculars to see them. But either way, they're living their life and just enjoying it. And, we're just kind of a fly on the wall, seeing them all do their thing.
I think it's the only organization that has to do with animals that I've ever seen where you have managed to make it about the animals entirely and not about the people.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the thing is, like I told you, I got drug into opening to the public, kicking and screaming, because I was absolutely concerned about the animals and wanted to make sure that it was a win for them. And it did. It ended up being a great way for people to learn and not impact the animals. And it allowed us to, even build more habitats and save more animals. And So it was the right thing to do, and it was a big leap of faith because it cost
Yeah.
millions of dollars,
Oh, I
and
bet.
we built it all ourselves. It
Jeez.
wasn't
So
something where
much
we just
work.
paid contractors to do it.
Yeah, you guys must have some incredible people on your team. So let's talk a little bit about. I don't think that many people are aware still. I think there's more awareness, but what the real crisis is. And there is a real crisis of people breeding these animals. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we refer to it as a captive wildlife crisis. And so when I first started, I didn't realize, even though I had gotten licensed and changed the zoning and did everything the right way when I was young and had the farm, but at the time I should have realized if zoos were crazy enough to send animals to a 17-year-old kid, even though I was licensed, that they were dumping them everywhere. And I didn't know that at first. But it was pretty quickly I realized that we started getting calls from, local sheriffs that said, "Hey, I found one in a house or an apartment or a garage
Oh,
or somebody's basement or a barn,"
right.
and everybody would get one, try to have it as a pet, and when that didn't work out, well, then they'd end up with getting a female so they could breed them and have babies and play with the babies. And so pretty quickly this thing got out of hand. It went from no animals outside the public zoo system to today there's over 20,000 lions, tigers, bears that are outside the zoo system in the United States. And
My God.
it's a crazy thing. And then many people might have seen Tiger King, which was a Netflix
I was going
thing.
to ask you about that.
Yeah, there were 70 million people that saw that show, and really that was the first time that many people really were exposed to the fact that there's guys out there like the featured characters in there that breed 70 to 100 baby tigers a year just to make money on them, and then 3 months later they want to just dump them or get rid of them because they're no longer making money for them.
Yeah, and they're harder to take care of when they're large.
Yeah, they cost money. You can't charge people money to play with one because at that point you'll get hurt.
That's terrible. I mean, I'm understating. It's like evil.
Yeah,
You know, so I'm thankful you guys are there to help with the problem. But did you find with the Tiger King show, which is an unfortunate, sort of fortunate, unfortunate. The show itself is. I wish we would stop as a country or as a people stop doing shows about distasteful human beings doing terrible things
right.
as entertainment. But did you find that it helped spread the message a little bit, or helped at all with fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, I knew of these characters long. I've been doing this 41 years, longer than any of these people, and so many of these really bad players had come onto the scene and were breeding and selling and even shooting and killing, lions and tigers and crazy stuff. So I knew about these people, and a lot of people that would run into them would come back to me and go, "Oh my God, how can somebody like this exist?" And I said, "Yeah, it's extremely hard to imagine that somebody that crazy can just keep operating and doing what they do, but there was dozens of these people out there." And so the show started off to be about the animals, but quickly the characters were so extreme they took over the whole point of the show. And but the good news was, again, 70 million people saw this and saw that there was baby tigers and other animals that were being exploited. So the great thing was that it created enough groundswell pressure that the government finally started to prosecute these people when, for years we had been begging for people like that to get, investigated and prosecuted and to prove that they were doing all sorts of illegal things and terrible. And it was just took that much public pressure to come on so suddenly that now out of three of the main characters that were in that show, those three have been shut down, and we've rescued over 127 of those animals from just the three of them, and there's still more to be done.
So right now, currently, with more on the way, you have 127 of those abused, like tigers and lions and bears.
Right. That came from Tiger King characters facilities.
Yeah. Wow. I think people watch that show and maybe they don't think beyond this is entertaining. Some people, other people, I'm sure it really impacts them. But on behalf of humanity, thank you for taking those animals in and giving them a better life.
Yeah, no, it's extremely expensive and a lot of work to do all that. Obviously, it costs about $10,000 per animal per year to try and take care of them. So, we have over 650 lions, tigers, bears, wolves, leopards, things that were all confiscated from people that were either illegally had them or were abusing them, or there was some, bad circumstance where they had to be, come to us, because we don't just go out and collect animals. We only take animals that are either going to be euthanized or are suffering greatly somewhere.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a very costly and complex process to try to get a lion or a tiger that's already pretty pissed off, to get him and rehabilitate him.
Yeah, and a lot of the extreme characters that were in Tiger King, when we went there, everybody carried guns and were known for shooting all sorts of things, and so we're in an environment where you're trying to rescue an animal and have to worry about getting your head blown off by one of these crazy people.
So you basically picked the most dangerous entrepreneur journey that anyone has ever chosen.
Yeah, one way or the other, it's the animals that
Yeah,
And if they wanted to kill me, I would have been dead a long time ago. But
sure.
their idea of playing is to toss you 20 feet in the air and
Yeah,
jump on you and drag you around and bite holes through everything you've got.
right.
And in their mind, they're just playing. In yours, you're lucky to be alive. Yeah.
So if one of them decides to love you a little too hard, that's not a great thing for you.
Yeah, just sitting on you. I, had many of them over the years that want to sit in your lap, and at 700 pounds, that's not very possible.
Or, yeah, I'm sure that's an easy way to get injured too.
Yeah.
So, I think one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'm going to come back to the cost, and we're going to talk about that a little bit because I really want people to understand that. But one thing that I wanted to ask you about is, I've talked to people about this, and there are people who have tigers in their backyard, or tigers in their shed, or a bear in a cage the size of a dog crate, or a large dog crate, and most people just kind of can't believe that because most people think, tiger's obviously dangerous. Why would I want one around me?
Sure.
So, can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I know you all, you do the rescues, like the big name rescues, like the Joe Exotic, but you're going and just getting like a single bear from someone's house now and then.
Right. Yeah, we've taken. There was a lady in Minnesota that had 3 bear cubs that she thought she would raise as children. She had them in the house and had clothes for them and would sit them at the dinner table in high chairs and thought she was going to raise these 3 bears just like they were triplets or something. And of course, it didn't work out. They started tearing the house to pieces. But that's the thing is 99.9% of the people out there realize, boy, it's crazy. I wouldn't get a tiger as a pet because he's going to, kill me or eat me or hurt me but they're that 1/10 of 1% out of 350 million people, whatever there are, it is a lot of people. And so we still run into almost everybody we go to is in complete denial. They somehow think that they're doing a great job and the animals are starving or suffering greatly, or they think that they can somehow keep it as a pet and show it to their friends. And we had people call us probably 6 times where somebody walks into a PetSmart with a tiger on a leash thinking,
oh my God,
they're just going to go to PetSmart and get some supplies for their tiger. And so most of them are people that are trying to get attention. These are a lot of times it's young guys that want to act tough or cool or whatever. And there's other people that do it because they're animal hoarders and they started with maybe some farm animals and ended up getting into lions and tigers. Sorry, I have a English bulldog snoring at my feet here, so I don't know if that's coming through or not.
You know what? It doesn't matter. With what you do for a living, we excuse you from all noise. If you have a bulldog and you've got tigers outside, don't worry about it. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's that's one of those things that people don't think about that world exists, but it's kind of a little sad and a little crazy at the same time.
Yeah, it really is. There's people that have elephants privately. There's people that have polar bears privately. There's extreme animals that just and so many of these are off the grid. Some of them are up front, want attention, and other ones are just off the grid where nobody even knows that they have these animals until one escapes or gets in trouble some way or the other.
Something bad happens. So I know you've saved, I think I read that you've saved over 1,000 animals, and I'm sure the impact you've had beyond that by inspiring other people, you've probably saved a lot more. And each one has a story, but is there any particular rescue story for you that really touched you that you'd like to tell us about? Is there anyone that stands out to you in all those?
Well, there's different kinds of ways that they've touched me, like and down deep in your soul, every one of these animals, seeing them go from when you arrive to save them and they're starving or they're have open wounds or whatever, and you're going to be able to help them, but seeing them transition obviously is where the payoff is for us, because if all you saw was the negative side every time you went and got these animals and never got to see the recovery, I couldn't have lasted 41 years. I would have been insane in the first year. But So seeing the recovery helps a ton. And we had one tiger that is still here with us today that was out in Mexico, and he had his back broken, and so he just drug his back legs around, and so every bit of his legs had open sores down to the bone, and no medical care, no nothing. They was just chained up on this concrete patio, and so when we got him, your initial indication is to think, well, geez, there's nothing we can do. This guy's suffering so bad, maybe we should, put him to sleep or do something. And over the years, I've always learned to never give up and to always try as long as the animals aren't suffering. And so we rescued him and brought him back, and thank God we had a veterinarian, and still have a veterinarian that is, her specialty is stem cell therapy. And so she started to do stem cell treatments to this tiger in hopes that he would at least gain some feeling or something to where he could control his legs better. Maybe never walk, but control his legs better, because he just drug like wet noodles behind him, and it actually worked. I mean, he started to get his legs underneath him, and he started to be able to sit normal, and then next thing you know, he's standing. And then finally, a year and a half later, he actually ran for the first time ever, and it was just blew my mind to watch that day, to see him, going from where I thought we were going to have to euthanize him the first day I saw him, to the point where he could live like another tiger and play and run and live in a habitat. And it's just a miracle. It was truly a miracle, and obviously one of those rare cases, because we'd had the resources to do it. But and then we've had other rescues that were just crazy, where we're trying to get animals from drug dealers, and they have armed guards with M16s, and they're you go to their facility, and you're not sure you're going to come out, because these guys have terrible reputations, and they're mad, and they don't want you to be there, and yet you're thinking, oh my God, any second we're going to everybody will just get killed and buried out back somewhere. And so there's lots of different stories and animals that we've saved and rescued over the years that were pretty monumental and mean a lot. And there's also ones that I knew very well, lived here their whole life, 24 years.
Wow.
And was very close to for all those years.
Yeah, so they're almost like friends, because they've been around so long. That's amazing, man. That is just truly amazing. So I'm gonna end by, we're gonna talk a little bit about how much the sanctuary costs to operate and fundraising, because I really want people to be able to know how to help. But we focus on storytelling a lot on this podcast, and we also talk about leadership. But I've been thinking a lot about the Wild Animal Sanctuary and how you tell the story of this brand, and how important it is that you tell the story. So how do you think about that as you all are operating? How do you go about thinking about telling your story and making sure people know?
Well, the number one thing that, as you said in the early part of the show, is just most people don't even realize this problem exists, and when you tell them, they almost don't believe it. And again, that's why Tiger King was so amazing, is it showed them like right in those people's living room. Okay, yeah. Here it is, front and center. But so for us, that's always the challenge right off, is just getting people to realize that this problem exists, and that it's on a giant scale, and that it's a monumental problem that needs to be solved. And so from day one, we've always entered this, when I started, to solve the problem, not to just participate and give animals homes. I mean, I wanted to make sure they were all, the ones we rescued, lived well, but truly it was about trying to find a way to solve this problem. And it really boils down to breeding, because like Joe Exotic and all those guys, if they breed 70 to 100 tigers a year, we're going to have to take another 70 to 100 tigers a year for every one of those guys. And that's not what it's about. It's about trying to stop it. And I really believe that public pressure is where the answer really lies, because a lot of times I use the analogy that, if your neighbor calls you up and said, hey, I have a tiger cub, you want to come see it? Most people are like, wow, how many chances do I ever get to see a tiger cub? Well, I'll come over and see it. But if they called you up and said, hey, I found this baby by a dumpster, you want to come see it, this human baby? You'd be like, well, why aren't you calling the police? Why aren't you taking it to a hospital? What are you going to do with that baby? And the level of concern that they had, that was different. One, they wanted to go see it and pet it. The other one, they were worried about its welfare. And so it really takes people caring enough to say, wait a minute, like when they see somebody like Joe Exotic, where you go, oh, you can pull over here and pay $200 to play with baby tigers. I get it that maybe we can pet it, but I'm worried about it's going to live 24 years. Where's it going to go? And who's going to take care of it? And so for us, our brand is really about trying to get people to understand that this is serious and that there's a giant problem that we need to solve it, and there's only certain ways we can solve it, because even if you pass all the laws in the world, people still break the law, and guns and drugs and you name it. So we'll always have the problem, but for us, it's really about trying to change the social conscious about how people value animals in general.
Yeah, and especially these rare animals that are large and majestic and beautiful and part of history. And so yeah, I'm sure that is just a storytelling challenge and a marketing challenge and a fundraising challenge. One of the things I noticed about I wanted to just call out that you all do with your storytelling, and I'd encourage everyone to go to their website and look at some of the videos. You all don't do, the Sarah McLachlan, like really dramatic music and the animals suffering thing. I've noticed that all your stories are you don't exploit the animal's pain to try to get to people to care. And I'm very touched by that, because you're just making it harder on yourself in a way, but you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, and we learned early on that most everybody knows that animals suffer. I mean, I don't think anybody out there isn't aware that, and most people we run into that are really good supporters, the first thing they say is, I don't want to see that because I know it exists. I want to know about what are we doing to solve that problem. So we skip by the whole, hey, here's all the gross, terrible blood and guts and all that, because you already know that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business. What we want to do is tell you about what we can do for those animals and what we can do to help solve this problem. And so that's where we get a lot of our traction and support and things like that.
There's just a lot of hope. I see a lot of hope and a lot of beauty in your storytelling.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And I think that's really admirable, because the way you tell the animal stories, there's just this through line of, real empathy and real care that I think is, we need more of it, period, across the board. But you all have done a wonderful job with that.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me talk to you a little bit about leadership. So you have a team, a lot of volunteers. I know you have employees as well, and what you all do is so unique and so challenging, and I think probably really heart-wrenching at times. So how do you keep your team moving forward and motivated?
Well, early on, it was just leading by example. I think, when I first started, didn't have enough money to do anything. So I learned, okay, if you're going to get something or you need something, you're going to have to learn how to do it yourself. So everything from, plumbing, electrical to construction to you name it. I mean, it was welding. And so I just learned very quickly. Every time we needed something, I had to learn how to do this or do this or do this. And I think that inspires others to say, wow, you don't have to have a degree in this or degree in that. And so like our animal caretakers, we don't require them to have biology degrees or anything that's specialized at all in animals. What we do is we look for people that have already committed their life to helping animals, people that have, kids that have gone to the shelter and volunteered and did a number of things in their life to point out the fact that they do value animals. And then we'll train them. We'll teach them everything they need to know about how to care for these animals and what they need. And so I think that everybody realizes that there is no pretentious anything here. Everything is really about the animals. And if you're not here for the animals, then, have a good life and we wish you the best. But only the people that really dedicate their lives to animals are really here to do what they need to be done.
Right. So you find people who are really passionate about the mission.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody here is every bit as passionate as I am about animals.
That's great. Yeah. And it comes through. I mean, the everything from your website to any of the articles I've read about you all, and, my vice president's firsthand experiences, and she's probably one of your biggest fans. So
well, that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing what you guys do. I think a lot of businesses could learn a lot from what you all do, because the dedication and the way that you help each other get this done is really admirable.
Yeah. And the few stories that I've read about other, people that have really made a big difference and had really massive impacts in different ways, I think their stories are very similar, where they were just very iconic in what they were doing, and people said, hey, here's somebody who's really in it for the right reasons and not somebody who's in it for the money or is in it for glory or anything else. You're in it just to really help the animals. And so whether you're doing that or running a business for something else, I think that comes through pretty quickly to people that want to evaluate the original founder or the director or whoever it is.
Yeah, and also it's pretty hard to sustain anything difficult like whether that's just a small business that's hard because economically it's challenging, or the example, like, I look to you guys, and any day I've had that's hard, and I've been doing this for about 27 years, is your all's easiest day. Like, so you're a great example, I think, for all of us of like how passion and dedication to like the mission of what you're doing will really
Yeah.
sustain you. So
Well,
that's
thank you.
amazing.
A lot of people always go, oh, what's going to happen when, if you get hit by a bus? And I'm like, I'm not worried a bit because everybody here has that torch. Everybody here carries it on. And, we have a complete, development department and marketing and PR and, everybody. So we have a ton of people here so I might be the crazy guy that dreams up the elevated walkway or whatever else, but by far and large, everybody here would carry that torch no matter what. So I think that's the thing that people need to realize is, it doesn't just snuff out the second that I'm gone.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite an organization that you all have built over the years. I mean, it's very large. And so let's talk a little bit about, I don't think people have any idea the amount of money it takes to run something like this. I think we might even just appreciate it, but we still don't know. So can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, well, having 650 lions, tigers, and bears, we feed over 80,000 pounds of food a week.
Whoa.
So that in itself is a massive undertaking to create the diets for 650 large carnivores and other animals, and then feed that multiple times a week, and get that out. So 80,000 pounds a week is about $8 million a year in food, and so we're very grateful that we have a very large sponsor that helps supply that food to us, and that helps tremendously because then we can direct those resources towards habitats and other things. But just an army of people to just sort that food, and even the drivers, we have refrigerated trucks and full-time drivers that go pick up all this food and bring it back, and an army of employees and volunteers both that sort the food and get it ready for the daily feedings. But we have over 85 employees, and we have over 160 volunteers, and so the total budget on a yearly basis is about $23 million a year. And that includes, all the rescues we do, which we do international rescues all over the world. We've, been to, dozens of countries all over the world helping with this problem, because now many other countries are starting to have the same problem that we have here, where, economies have grown and people are getting more wealthy and more privileges, and all of a sudden the first thing they think of is the crazy ones think of having a lion or tiger. So
great.
It's starting to replicate, and so we've invested quite a bit in trying to solve those problems in other countries before it gets out of hand, which we've done very well with, but there's still a lot more countries that we have to work with. But in general, it's a massive undertaking to take care of these animals. It takes a lot of time and energy and food and money and just the equipment alone to our refuge that's in southern Colorado to build the habitats down there that are 300 acres or 200 acres in size each habitat, and the amount of there's hundreds of miles of fencing that's involved in just surrounding these big massive habitats that they have.
Right, and then maintenance and the infrastructure and water and and then I can't imagine just the logistics of trying to get, you think of all the different logistics you have to deal with supplies and medical care, but just the logistics of a feeding alone must just be like an army deploying.
It does, and to just know that every day that machine keeps working and the animals get these amazing diets, that when we're in the nutrition center and you look at the food that they get to eat, you think, geez, these guys eat way better than any of us ever get to eat. And the donations that come in sometimes, they're eating lobster and crab and salmon, and the bears are just feasting on these amazing meals, and we're all eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and doing whatever we can to survive.
That's great. Yeah, I saw a video of the bears like chowing down on a bunch of pumpkins, and they look like they're having the best time of their lives.
Yeah. Oh, and they love it. Yeah, they love it. They get the peaches in the fall from Palisade Peaches, which are really amazing peaches. People buy cases of them and send them so that the bears can have these wonderful peaches, and we're watching them just going slobbering peach juice everywhere, and we're like, okay, well, at least somebody's getting it.
That's so great. So with the pandemic that we all we're still sort of coming out of, and everyone trying to get back to some semblance of whatever normal is going to be from here. How did COVID impact your fundraising and all your operations?
Well, like pretty much everybody, it definitely hit us, from out of the blue where nobody was expecting any of this. And early on with the initial shutdowns, that definitely affected us. And thankfully we were given the status to be able to come in and still feed the animals and take care of them. And but as far as donations and visitors and all those kinds of things, that was impacted severely. And our food supply was really impacted. You saw how people initially started to go for toilet paper, but that branched out into everything in the stores disappeared. And so for a while there, we were having a really difficult time trying to get food for the animals just because of these rushes on markets. And so in the first few months, it was a real struggle. People weren't donating as much because everybody was worried about what's the world coming to. And but eventually, as things kind of settled to where people could go out and at least they have a mask on or whatever, and with the government governors and other people saying go outside and do something outside, a lot of people said, oh well, we could go to the sanctuary because they have that outdoor walkway. And so the later part of 2020, we actually saw more people just because it was a good place for people to go. And I think that between the two, we still ended up in a negative, obviously, for 2020, but 2021 has been better and people are starting to get more comfortable with this. And so, we don't really know where it's all going to end up, but it was definitely a struggle just like it was for most people.
I'm glad that you all, navigated it. And I'm sure it was an incredible challenge and really hurt your also overall operating budget. So we will on this podcast and in the materials we put out on LinkedIn and everything, we're going to try to direct right to your donations page because, well, quite frankly, anything anyone can do, because everyone's trying to get back on track. But, these animals got to get fed and they got to get fed every day.
Yeah, they don't have any say in it at all. A lot of us kind of felt like animals through this whole COVID thing where we didn't get much choice in what was going on.
Yeah, maybe we got to experience the helplessness they feel a little bit. Yeah. So let me end. I always end with just some really quick questions, and we've got about 5 or 10 more minutes. And so what do you think makes you feel inspired or your best self at work?
Oh man, I still connect with animals even from when I grew up on that farm. I felt an affinity to them. I seemed like I could, communicate with animals really well, or at least instead of so much communicating with them, I observe animals very well, and so that to me makes it feel like I always put myself in their shoes, and try to see the world from their side. So I still think that that's really inspires me when we go out and we rescue all these animals, and it's like meeting 20, 30 new refugees. It's like saving them, and each one's got their own story, their own background, their own likes and dislikes. And so, we're really in the business of saving souls or lives, if you want to call it that. And so it still inspires me to meet every last animal and get to know every last animal we rescue, so that I'm sure personally that we're doing the right thing for that animal, because what you might do for this tiger might not work at all for this tiger.
All right. So that's great. So you still get that satisfaction out of each animal that joins your crew there.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So is there any piece of advice over the years, like you all have accomplished so much, is there any one piece of advice that really sticks with you that you got early on?
Early on, I, like most people, we make the mistake of thinking that, as far as trying to get support for what we were doing is that, instantly everybody cares, and you realize everybody has different interests in life and different things like that. And so one of the things that we had to learn early on was, hey, if you're not presenting your story and your needs to the right people, then you're going to suffer greatly, and the animals will suffer greatly. And so being just like a parent when you're raising your kids and you feel that responsibility that, geez, I got to pay the bills, I have to have a roof over their head, I have to have food for them to eat, you really quickly start to sweat the fact of, okay, well, where are we going to get support for these animals? Because every time I would rescue one, I'd say, oh, there's another 20 years I got to take care of this tiger, or bears can live 40 years. I'd say, oh, now there's another bear that I'm responsible for 40 years.
Yeah, right.
So you start to really think about, that. And so early on we were struggling because we didn't know what we needed to do. And then finally we were very blessed to meet a guy that was an incredible marketing person and who really understood, he said, you really need to find out who it is that has the affinity for these animals like you do, and how to find those people. And because we were telling our story to the whole world, and we still do in that sense, but making sure that we were getting in front of the people that would instantly go, oh yeah, I care about this. I really do care about these animals. Made a giant difference. So, starting 15, 16, 18 years ago, whenever it was, we started to really focus our message to make sure that we were telling everybody, but for sure it was getting in front of the right people that would care about the animals and knew exactly what, or felt exactly how we felt about the animals. And that made a gigantic difference in our ability to, bring in more, raise more money, and also help more animals. Because I know there was a turning point where I said, okay, I can take care of this many animals pretty much myself. And it got to that size, 30 years ago. And I had to make the decision. Do I just stay this size and just one man fight this deal, or do we really take this more? And I, even though I didn't really want to grow bigger, I knew that it was irresponsible to not help more animals. And I thought, it can't be selfish and say I'm going to help 30 animals because that's what I can do reasonably myself. Or do I want to help 300 or 3,000 animals and do it, and it's going to be where I have to sacrifice what's good for me.
Yeah, right.
And so I did. I made that decision. I said, okay, screw it. It doesn't matter what's good for me. What matters is what's good for the animals. And so when I crossed that bridge, then my focus really became like very laser sharp about what do I need to do to make this better and help more animals and really try to solve this problem. And so there was a big turning point back then about that.
Good for you. And that advice that you were given and put into practice so well of finding your audience and finding your tribe. That is, I mean, we're a marketing company and we give the same advice. It's really great advice.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard. You start to have to really learn and work at finding those. But when you do, it definitely pays off.
Yeah. So let me ask you one final question. I'll get you out of here on time. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
This has been so enjoyable. What would you tell your younger self today? What advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, definitely. People ask me all the time, did I see it getting to where it is today when I was young? And I said, animal-wise, yes. Meaning when I realized there were so many more than what I originally thought were in dire need, I thought, oh my God, this is something where I'm going to have to really scale this up to help that many animals. And so I kind of knew ahead of time that was going to be that. But definitely this whole educational component was something that I never expected to do. And when I started to do it, I really saw the benefit. I really could see how, and even today as people visit, it's amazing how when they walk out on the walkway and they're not necessarily what I would call, animal activists or anything like that. And just the transition of seeing the first time in their life that they've seen animals exhibited in a whole different way and coming back and going, wow, it was really cool to see these animals just living their life and doing their thing. That's something that I never really understood. And I would love to go back and say to myself, hey, this is really important. And you should do it much sooner in life than what we did, even though we've been doing it almost 20 years now. Actually, yeah, pretty close to 20 and 25 years of educating. But I would have really loved to adapt to that early on and realize the importance of it back then. But I was in the middle of trying to learn how to take care of lions and tigers more than educating people. So
right. Yeah, no big deal. Not like taking care of a lion or tiger is hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's great advice, and it's great perspective that you have now. And I think, you all are doing amazing work and educating people about this. So, yeah, we're happy to help tell your story a little bit and get the word out there. So, I think
thank you.
Absolutely, and I think organizations that don't do something as meaningful or as mission based as what you're doing, but are helping in their own little way, can learn a lot from you all and how you do business. So thank you for that. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you want to make sure you tell people?
No, I mean, I think that you suggested that they go to the website because there is so much more material and information about what we do. And the videos, they show everything from real rescues where they're right there in the middle of the whole thing to many of the very inspiring stories of some of these animals that have, come through hell and ended up with a wonderful life in the end. And so, just going to the website would help a lot.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And it was a pleasure to meet you. I can't say, I can't even tell you how much I appreciate what you do. And you're obviously just a really kind, really empathic human being. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.